How could the Greeks prove that the atom existed? And what does that have to do with being happy? Watch video to find out. Okay, the Greeks, dopest people that ever lived. They figured out all this stuff for us. Our politics, the sports, math, law, medicine, you name it, baby. But most importantly, philosophy. Thank you, Greek person. As we discussed on this channel before, they even dig into topics like how to be happy. The Stoics talks about this topic a lot. Aristotle pondered about this a lot. Socrates, you know, we benefit so much from the Greeks, but why does it seem like still so many people are unhappy? Bro, if you're sad, just don't be sad. Well, I read Epicurus, The Art of Happiness, and I think it highlights pretty well why so many people are still unhappy to this day. Epicureanism is quite similar to Stoicism in many ways. There's a few determining factors. Don't need to get into the nitty-gritty. This is not an expert essay. I'm doing this video in hope that people will continue their exploration and discover Epicurus and read the book themselves, basically. I was gonna say a great way to understand Epicureanism is by just looking at the title. I thought the title was the science of happiness. Apparently it's the art of happiness. It should be the science of happiness. They messed it up. I'm just gonna pretend that that's what the book is called. The Science of Happiness, thank you. Because Epicureanism was using science as a fundamental for everything. God damn it, this has completely ruined my point. By understanding things, they alleviate your fear from them. People feared the gods, for example. They were quite wrathful people back in the ancient Greek. And, you know, Christianity, people fear hell. It's a similar concept. But their view was more agnostic in the sense that the gods don't really interact with us. Don't worry about them, basically. And from the principle of science, therefore, you know, the ancient Greeks explained all these natural phenomena by these amazing stories. You know, Helios, the sun god, being this chariot that carried the sun across the sky, and all these stories to explain these natural phenomena. But the Epicureans didn't believe in this. They understood that there's a way to explain everything. You can explain the heavenly bodies and what they are, and they're not there because of the gods necessarily, or if you see a rainbow, there's a natural way of explaining why it occurs. It's not some it's not some Irish dude hiding a bunch of treasure. In the end of this book, they go through all these natural occurrences and they try and explain them, but they don't necessarily say, oh, we know for sure this is how it is. So even though it isn't great, you know, they don't explain everything perfectly, obviously. That's still what science is. They do their best of trying to explain things from how they observe it. But there's one thing that Epicurus in particular knew for sure, which is the existence of the atom, which I think is so cool. When I heard about this the first time, I was like, what? How did they figure that out? I'm sorry, what? They figured out the atom existed 2,000 years ago? What? So he knew this based on two principles. Number one, that we can all observe is that bodies move. Yeah. Number two is the principle that nothing comes into the existence from nothing. This was a principle that was known throughout at this time by some, at least that upheld it, as far as I understand. And it kind of goes with the whole point that they didn't try and explain natural occurrences as something magical made up by the gods, but rather trying to understand how they come into existence based on other things. They basically understood that for anything to occur, there has to be a reason for it to occur, or there's an explanation for why it happens. Those are the two things. So these bodies that we observe, we can break down into pieces. Anyone can understand that. But Epicurus knew that this process of breaking down into pieces, it can't go on forever, because then it would break the law that the bodies would dissolve into nothing eventually if you repeat this process. So he understood that there has to be one singular non-compound entity that exists, which is the atom. There you go. Another thing that he believed was that the universe is infinite, you know, which isn't hypothetically false. At least it's not impossible. So I don't know, I just think it's cool. So they figured out all this scientific stuff. Felix, okay, great, what about it? How do I become happy? Well, So their actual philosophy, Epicureanism philosophy, is technically hedonistic, which means indulging in pleasures, and that's what they value. Now, as it turns out, slander is not a unique concept for our time. It occurred back then as well. And the group of Epicureans were heavily slandered through this principle of hedonism and try to print them as these sort of sex-mongering, orgy-porgy, alcohol drunkards group of people. And that's worked successfully for many years until scholars decided, actually, no, there's plenty of evidence to show complete opposite, that this was all fabricated. And in fact, the truth is that they were quite ascetic in the terms of practicing their own self-discipline. So when you say they're technically hedonistic, what that means is that to them, the highest pleasure is a clear mind, free from any of pain. Their goal is to achieve pleasure but also eliminate pain. And they divide very cleverly, I think, pleasure into 3 categories. Number 1 is what we all need, which is a shelter, home, relationships, something that we all sort of depend on, more or less. Number 2 is things that we want, such as luxuries, sex, alcohol. Much like the Stoic, they say, you know, it's okay to indulge in these things, but practice it in moderation. And considering they were quite ascetic, you know, they understood the dangers of indulging in these things. And then you have the last one, which is things that you want, but they are just bad for you in general, which is power, being famous. And the principle here is that you will never have enough of these things. You will never be satisfied having these things. Very few people go and say, hey, you know what? I have enough money now. Thank you. Jeff Bezos isn't really going, hey, you know what? I got enough fame and power. I'm quite pleased now. No, everyone keeps pursuing these things. At least most people do, because they have no limit. And I would actually argue that these two go in the same category as sex and luxuries, but I'm also very heavily simplifying these things, so take it with a grain of salt. So Epicurus had this garden, which is on the cover, which is quite famous and referenced by a lot of people. I think it was used as this area where you would teach yourself to not be dependent on these luxuries and sort of things. And garden is quite fitting for that. I remember, I think it was Socrates that was pondering of what things are good and what things are bad, kind of similar to Epicurus. And there was this example of a flower being this pure good because you smell it, you enjoy it, and there's no bad consequences for it. But whether you drink alcohol, you might feel good, but afterwards there's a consequence for it. And a lot of Epicureanism is knowing what these things are, taking action to avoid or engage with depending on that. So in a lot of sense, it makes sense that the science of happiness in the terms of knowing what things are good for us. There's virtue in knowing, basically. So in that sense, we can take measures in life of not feeling pain later. Maybe you enjoy smoking. Well, we know that causes cancer, so you might want to avoid that. And that's the sort of net positive and net loss that Epicureanism is based on, trying to compare, you know, is it worth it? Is it worth engaging with these things? If you're practicing asceticism, it's a balance, basically. And the same thing when you're practicing asceticism in self-discipline, you know, if you're gaining more pain from withstanding from things in the long run, obviously, you know, doesn't that kind of defeat the whole purpose? Epicureanism also focused a lot on mental pain, and they put that up as worse than physical pain because it happens before, during, and after. So they link that with this might come out a bit out of nowhere, but I did like this passage. As someone who's dealt with a lot of anxiety myself, they sort of use this principle of avoiding mental pain by talking about fear of death, for example. Second, you should accustom yourself to believing that death means nothing to us, since every good and every evil lies in sensation. But death is the privation of sensation. Hence, a correct comprehension of the fact that death means nothing to us makes the mortal aspect of life pleasurable, not by conferring on us a boundless period of time, but by removing the yearnness for deathlessness. There's nothing fearful in living for the person who has really laid hold of the fact that there's nothing fearful in not living. So it is silly for a person to say that he dreads death, not because it will be painful when it arrives, but because it pains him now as a future certainty. For that which makes no trouble for us when it arrives is a meaningless pain when we await it. This, the most horrifying of evils, means nothing to us then, because so long as we are existent, death is not present, and whenever it is present, we are not existent. It is of no concern either to the living or to those who have completed their lives. For the former, it is non-existent, and the latter are themselves non-existent. There was also a passage, I don't remember where it is, but it was talking about life is long enough for someone that lives it well. Wish I could find it. Read the book, it's great. So, you know, since Epicureanism and Stoicism are quite similar, I'm probably still more in the Stoic sort of playfield of ideas that I prefer. Having pain can always be avoided no matter what measures you take, and having that pain be your virtue, I think, is something really powerful. Science is setting us free from pain, but you could also argue that science causes pain, and it creates more of these things that we are dependent on that is necessary in modern society to engage with. When we're talking about the things that we absolutely necessarily need, which is a home, food, and friends, you know, now it seems like you need some form of transport to get around. You need access to the internet. Otherwise, you can't really be a productive member anymore. And sure, we can alleviate the fear of God by understanding things about, you know, the heavenly bodies, but doesn't that also sort of alleviate any form of spirituality that we had with those things? Sure, we understand that the sun is not the sun god Helios carrying it across the sky, but we understand it's just a ball of gas or whatever that we could literally shoot with nuclear missiles if we so damn pleases us. Is there a net loss or a net gain there? I don't know. But Epicureanism is in a sense a withdrawal from society, so you know, likely they wouldn't even care to have these sort of things anyway. It's living your life the way you do it, engage in the things that you find positive for yourself, and completely ignore everything that doesn't. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, and I think that could work for a lot of people. So I recommend the book. Check it out. If you enjoyed, smash a like, subscribe, and you can win $1 billion. Which of course you wouldn't want anyway, am I right? Bye!